Well, thanks so much to everyone who's joining us today. You are here for the sneak peek hosted by Mind Team Solutions to learn a little bit more about Network for Victim Recovery of DC. And for those of you who may not already know about NVRDC, we are a holistic victim service provider in the District of Columbia. And what that means is that we offer a collaborative continuum of various services to survivors who experience any crime type in the district. And our primary goal is that we are trying to center what we call survivor-defined justice. That's the recognition that survivors are the expert of their own experience. They know what pathways after experiencing victimization are going to be the safest and most empowering for them. We kind of lay out what those options are, and whatever path they choose, we walk down that path with them in whatever way we can be most supportive. And so I thought it might be helpful to give you all a snapshot of what is the impact of our organization in our community. And just giving you a sense of our last fiscal year. So this would have run from October 1st of 2019 and ended this September. We served over 600 individuals who were impacted by crime. And just to give you a breakdown of what that looked like, 174 of those individuals had already been receiving services prior to October of 2019 and continued to need ongoing support in the aftermath of that victimization. But 430 of these individuals were new clients who had experienced the crime during this reporting period. And one thing that is probably, I would say, the most impactful entry point into our services is the fact that we run the 24-hour sexual assault crisis response for the District of Columbia. So what that means is any adult who experiences sexual violence, who wants to access a medical forensic exam or even follow-up medical care and services, they can do that whether or not they choose to report to the police. These are free, accessible services, and our advocates meet those individuals at the hospital, sit with them through that experience, and offer all of the ongoing follow-up care. And we offered this service to 354 survivors during this last fiscal year. And of that, the notable number is that 154 of these survivors accessed our services after March 16th, when we were responding to the global pandemic. And these services are accessed in one of the busiest emergency departments in our region at MedStar Washington Hospital Center. And so what I really like to highlight is that we were asking our advocates who already do really incredibly difficult and important work to show up and do this work while we were responding to COVID-19. And I love Reese's picture here because you can tell she's smiling under her mask. They still show up with this incredible amount of passion and dedication, despite the conditions in which we were offering services to those 154 people during that time. And we feel like it's really important to make sure we are adequately compensating our staff for the important work that they're doing. And so we moved to offer hazard pay for every hour that those advocates were in the hospital since March. That ended up being over 300 hours of services in that setting. And it cost the organization $11,000 in hazard pay that was not covered by government grants, but felt really, really important for us to both offer to them, to acknowledge how difficult and hard this work is under these conditions, but also to align with our value of sustainable passion and making sure that we're taking care of the people doing this work. I also wanted to note that we offered 177 safe rides to survivors in the last fiscal year. So we offer free transportation to and from the hospital when survivors need to access this exam, recognizing that having the services available does not always mean actionable access if they can't figure out a way to get to the actual hospital. And so that's something that's really important to us. In addition, we always take clients on through our office intake. So that's someone learning about our services either from a referring partner agency or even just Googling us and recognizing that we can offer support to them. What's really important to highlight here is that since March, we did 66 additional office intakes on top of that 154 survivors that you saw accessing our services through the hospital. And this is a 60% increase over that same time period in the prior year. And so while we've really heard a lot about how COVID has increase the lethality of how survivors are experiencing violence, particularly related to intimate partner violence and sexual assault. This is a real data point that demonstrates the need is actually increasing during this time period, and we need to be prepared for the long-term consequences of this increase in demand. And I do want to mention the services of our attorneys. In addition to our amazing advocacy team, we have in-house staff attorneys that offer an incredible array of wraparound services to survivors of violence. And in FY20, these attorneys handled over 332 cases. And the important thing to highlight that's really unique to this past year, the chart that you see here on the left, this was FY19 when we served 447 individual cases with varying legal needs, but only 43 of those cases did not dispose of during that same time period, because typically the legal cases that we're supporting individuals with can wrap up fairly quickly. And what we've seen with COVID, because the courts essentially came to a halt in March and are just now slowly starting to reopen to dispose of these cases, you see that number 152 of the 332 clients that came to us new for the first time this year for legal support, 152 of them have carried over and are active cases for our attorneys right now. We're essentially starting the year with 152 cases, which is really different than the prior years where we're typically looking around 40 to 50 carrying over. And so I think it's important to talk about not just the impact of our direct services on the community and the individuals who are accessing those services, but we do some really incredible and innovative systemic advocacy to support the community and survivors and the loved ones of those survivors. Probably one of the most notable changes that we made this year in March, when the court put out an administrative order about how they were going to be responding to requests for emergency release of individuals who are being held, either being incarcerated or being held pre-detention related to a trial that was pending. These were really important health and safety concerns being expressed of these individuals, but the court in their order and how they would treat this process neglected to consider how they would advise individual victims who were harmed in these cases about a potential for release. And so we advocated with the DC Superior Court to ensure that prosecutors were required to keep victims in the loop as these requests for emergency release were being asked of the court. Additionally, we worked with a local law firm to develop and file over a dozen preemptive motions with the court. And these were really in pending cases where a survivor of gender-based violence, so either a sexual assault, domestic violence, or a stalking case, putting the court on notice that if they were going to be considering an early release for the individual who had caused harm in these cases, that we really wanted to make sure we had the ability for the victim to be put on notice about that early release and give them an opportunity to plan about what safety was going to look like for them should that change happen. We also collaborated with a pretty wide group of different agencies and organizations around this issue to send a letter to our local leaders about how you center survivor voices in these really, really important moves to protect the health and safety of the inmates. And this resulted in an op-ed in the Washington Post that I thought did a really good job capturing the nuance of how we protect our entire community as it relates to the safety needs focused around what the pandemic had created in terms of the court's response to pending criminal prosecutions and ongoing active cases. And then we filed 3 additional amicus. This is just a fancy word for a filing where we're a friend of the court trying to communicate an important policy position. This is the largest number of amicus filings we have done in all of our prior years collectively. And so it was quite an active year in terms of the legal systemic advocacy we were focused on. But at the same time, the Department of Education was putting out really sweeping changes to the landscape of protections for student survivors at colleges and universities. And these changes took effect in August when students were still adjusting to what the pandemic was doing to their education and how they were going to be accessing that education in this current year. So what felt important to us was to make sure we could equip both administrators, supporters of student survivors, and students themselves with resources and information about how COVID, how the changes that we're rolling out in August were going to be impacting what they could expect from their institution. And I really think we put out some of the most nuanced, compelling resources that we saw from organizations doing this nationally around the country. We had the intersection of defamation and reporting sexual harassment or assault to your institution. We put out a toolkit for advocates. We even put out how your campus has to comply with federal regulations, even in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. And we have a full compilation of these resources that folks can access on our website. And I really do think that they set a stage for how knowledgeable and nuanced our staff is in understanding the landscape of Title IX and how these changes will potentially impact survivors' experiences. And while all of this impact was happening and these services were being provided, we also launched a very groundbreaking project in partnership with the University of Maryland through their Do Good Institute. They provided us with a seed grant, which we have now named iEmpower. And it's a collaborative project with our organization and the local forensic nursing program. And through this project, we are assessing local OBGYN providers on their education and training and how they offer care to someone who has experienced sexual violence. And through that survey, we're developing a curriculum to really integrate trauma-informed care into how they offer services to all different survivors who might be accessing the OBGYN services that this particular provider is offering in the region. And through that, we'll develop an interactive tool that survivors themselves can use to look at potential providers that they're considering going to and whether or not they've gone through this educational curriculum to really make sure that they feel comfortable knowing the provider they're going to is going to understand how to provide them with OBGYN services in a trauma-informed way. We're really excited about this innovative project. And so I think it's also important, particularly thinking about the ways that we have engaged with Mind Team and other organizations who think about the importance of supporting community impact, whether that's through donating pro bono in-kind services or even volunteering, all the ways that individuals can support the work of places like NVRDC. We work pretty closely with over 20 law firms, and we invite those law firms, once they're trained and mentored by our in-house counsel, to offer free legal services to survivors directly. And I'm really proud that last year we logged almost 4,000 hours of donated in-kind pro bono legal services to survivors. This resulted in what would have cost $2.6 million if survivors were paying for those services. And this is in over 84 different matters. And so I think it's important to highlight how this pro bono impact really serves as a multiplier of how we make sure that our impact is really a ripple effect on our local community. And so I hope after hearing about all of the services and the innovative programming that we've launched this year, that you all are feeling inspired. And if you are, this is the time where I would invite Josh from Mind Team Solutions to come on and have a little conversation with me about what in NVRDC inspired you to come to our events. Josh, you've been pretty closely connected to our work in our organization for actually, I think like going on 8 years, maybe even 9 years now. And I'd love to hear what inspired you about our organization, what inspires you to continue to engage with us, and why is it important to you?
Yeah, well, Bridgette, thank you for the presentation. And I'll give those answers. And I also have a few questions for you too, just based on some of the stuff you shared. But, you know, I mean, clearly, and I've known this since the beginning, you're doing real work. And I don't know, real isn't the right word, but just impactful stuff. I mean, it didn't take me until that last slide to feel inspired. You know, I've seen the work you've done from the beginning. So personally, it's been easy. Also, it doesn't hurt that, you know, one of my best friends from high school is, a leader in the leadership role in your position in the organization, and another one whose wife's on the board. So like, I have a couple personal connections, but and obviously getting to know you over that time also. So I when the people are good, it makes a heck of a difference. The mission and the work you're doing is real and is good. And from a continued perspective, in terms of Mind Teams, why I was excited to do this with you is really the aligned values. Innovation, equality, sustainable passion. Those three, which I believe are your core values, overlap with about, I think, 5 of our 9. And so when it's that type of alignment, it just makes sense. But personally, the bottom line, you really, where rubber meets the road, you're there. And in spite of everything going on, where the stuff is even needed more, you're there. So I mean, it's pretty easy and straightforward, answer in that regard. I guess the question I have for you, or a couple of questions, you mentioned this increase, 60% increase of cases, which I guess, I mean, well, it's not good. I mean, in a sense, it's keeping you busy, but I guess we'll have a few questions around that. One, how are you as an organization adjusting to this surge? I mean, that must be putting a strain on you guys to be able to, starting off the year, you said 150 new cases. That's all the numbers were up. So how are you handling that? What adjustments have you guys made?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's a little bit layered depending on the particular service that someone is kind of coming into our organization to access. And the reason I say that is, of the 350 plus survivors that came to us through the hospital context, we typically serve about 500 a year in that space. And so we were seeing lower numbers across the board. And I think, we don't have the data on this, but I would assume that that's because survivors were making really hard choices about, do I go to an emergency department to access this exam? What are the risks, right, to my health? And so we did see a decrease. But what's interesting in terms of our capacity tax in that context is that we don't say no ever, right? It doesn't matter if we were to get to 600, right? We could, whatever the number is of survivors showing up at the hospital, our advocates who are doing a 24-hour on-call shift. And when I used to do that shift, my very first day, I had 4 cases in 24 hours. And that's what we know our marching orders are to show up when survivors show up. So in some ways, for that particular entry point, the capacity tax is never going to serve as a barrier to how much we can offer or what we can do. It does require us as an organization to figure out how to support the staff, right, that are showing up and doing that hard work. But when you talk about the legal program, it's a little bit different. We have more flexibility to sort of assess, and a responsibility under our ethics, right, as lawyers, to say, how much can I really take on to make sure I'm doing my due diligence for all of my clients? And what's been interesting is that of those 150 cases that have carried over, we haven't been able to, dispose of them because of the court closure. And the court just announced that November 9th, they're going to start hearing these cases again. And so I just came off of a program meeting this morning. We talked about, hey, let's see where we are after this quarter. We get rid of 50% of those cases, and we're able to sort of move them through the court process like we would have. We don't know how quickly the court is going to be able to really roll all of those CPOs into the court process, because it's not just our organization that's sitting at this point, right? It's a lot of other legal service providers. And so we're not at this point in time having to say, let's not onboard new clients, because it's not stacking up in a way that our capacity is being taxed to the point we have to turn people away. But if we aren't able to get some of those 150 off in the next few months, we're going to be looking at a really challenging time where we potentially have to tell new clients we don't have the capacity. And so I think all of that is to say, we've heard, and we've actually been seeing data from the COVID-19 pandemic, that particularly for survivors of intimate partner violence, the need is greater now than it normally is. We have people suffering from, extreme financial stress. They're home with their families 100% of the time. Some people have lost jobs, and it just creates this really tense space for individuals who may already have been experiencing abuse, or may now be experiencing abuse because of all of this sort of dynamic that didn't exist in their life before. And so what's important for us, and knowing that we're going to probably continue to see this increase in demand, is really advocating for the courts that they are moving to reopen, that they are moving to hear these cases, that we're able to get people the support they need now, so that we don't reach a point in the future where the people that are coming in for the first time we don't have space, right? And so it's a little bit of a fluid answer, I guess, right now. And I'd love to follow up with you all, right, and see where are we come December? How many of these cases have we been able to get a positive outcome? And of course, the court is only one avenue, right? It's one pathway. So many of the survivors of the, about 500 that come to us through the hospital, only 50% of them last year reported the crime, only 50%. And that's because for survivors with various identities, right, reporting to a formal legal system or to the police may not be the pathway that feels safe or is safe for them. And so our job is to not just sort of lay the court out as the pathway for healing or any other service, but to present what are all of those options, and for whatever that individual's experience and lived experience has been, to let them decide which is going to be best for them.
Yeah. I love that, and thank you for that answer. And look, we're kind of in this not wait and see world, but that's the reality of the situation. So a couple other questions about this, then one other question I have for you. But so I guess with all of this trauma that the survivors are going through, where in I'll just call it the therapy side of things, do you get involved? Do you make recommendations? And I can see survivors and even your own staff dealing with this stuff on an ongoing basis, and maybe build up a callus. But, I know in talking to other therapists, they have 50-minute sessions and they have a little bit of a 10-minute break before they jump into the next one. And maybe not exactly that, but, how do you handle that internally? And then how do you handle that from the outside, or with the survivors or clients that come to you?
It's a great question. Almost every client that comes to us, whether their victimization is sexual violence or if they're a surviving family member of a homicide victim, almost every person that presents to us, we're encouraging and supporting them with the spaces where they can access individual therapy or group therapy. And we did a gap assessment last year, and we had a small grant to support what was identified as a pretty unique gap in the district specifically for sexual assault survivors accessing a support group. Because there wasn't a good hub in the existing mental health partners we had that kind of had the rapport and the relationship to create the chain of trust for individual survivors to think a group setting was a safe place for them. And so we actually, with two of our staff, were able to build some short-term support groups, and they ended up being virtual just by the nature of the challenge that we were all presented with. In some ways, was good and bad. I think it creates sort of greater accessibility for some folks, but we have to consider the technology gap as a potential barrier. So we don't offer that individual therapy right now. Our gap assessment has really focused more on the group support context. And we're looking at how can we long-term continue to fill that gap with some partnerships with some of the other mental health providers. And it's just such a unmet need right now. If you go to the kind of three main mental health providers in our space, they almost always have wait lists. They're overtaxed, they're underfunded, right? It's a significant need that most communities, but particularly our community and the survivors that we serve have. But you raised such a great point. Like, we know there's a gap there, right? And the resources available, but in-house, it became very clear to us when we were doing some pulse checks of our organizational culture, the reality of vicarious trauma. And we don't always have that opportunity, as you described, to pace and sort of take a break and then get back to the clients' needs. They come up like acute fires all the time, right? And we have to be able to pivot and adjust to those needs without not always having the time personally to sort of take the space to process internally ourselves. And so one thing that we did to align with our sustainable passion goal is we actually contracted with an external therapist, and we provide monthly support groups to our staff. And they're only for the frontline staff. Managers do not participate, for just to create a space for colleagues to sit there and debrief together in a way that is confidential and is safe for them. recognizing that's not going to be the perfect solution, I think our approach has been to figure out where are both the small and big ways that we can operationalize this value of sustainable passion, not just in how we do the work, but how we take care of our people in the organization.
Yeah, I love that, and I think that's a great way of supporting them. And again, it's not easy, but you're providing a platform, and that's really, I think, what matters the most. I guess last question I'll ask about this, and this might be sort of a dumb question, but people, you're in a horrible event happens, and then people come to you. So I'll just call that by its nature. And you said people come to us, they have needs. It's sort of a reactive model. So I guess my question is, with the surge, with the nature of things, people being home more and violence up, and what we're just kind of talking about, I guess, is there anything proactive to kind of cut things off before it boils over into what is now a crime? Is there anything that can be done, and is there anything that you are already doing proactively in your advocacy and otherwise, perhaps, to address some of these things?
Yeah, this is a very relevant conversation in our space around prevention and response, right? We really view our primary role as first responders. We respond when someone has experienced something, sometimes the most horrific thing, they've experienced in their life. And then they're asked to navigate all these complicated systems. But that doesn't mean we don't play a role in the prevention, education, and conversation. I think particularly as it relates to gender-based violence, having really helpful conversations about healthy consent and what do healthy relationships look like, and being a part of those curriculums. We're lucky that DC just passed a law, gosh, I think 2 years ago, and called the School Safety Act, and it will require consent education for young students, right? Not getting them by the time they get to college or high school. And it's really focused on healthy relationships and building out, what that should look like, and trying to break down understanding consent in a way that sometimes is not taught to all of us, right? Depending on our lived experience. And we were able to sit on a working group committee to help come up with what some of that curriculum should look like. And so we try to look for these opportunities to at least inform prevention approaches and strategies, even though that's not our primary focus, because to your point, we really see those two things as really connected.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And what a cool, that's a such needed program. I mean, there's so many of these those are what I would call life skills to know, right? As you grow up, they were never taught in school when I went to school. And so that's awesome to hear that something like that even exists. So very cool.
Yeah, we're lucky. I think we have a really proactive community thinking about these issues and good leadership. There's always more work to be done. And so I think this is a great time to segue into, if someone is feeling inspired from this conversation, there are ways that you can support this kind of impact. And I think I would love to let people know that we have an upcoming benefit that we do every year that will be on November 5th. And I'll just chat in the chat box at the end the links to all of these things that I'm going to mention in the next few slides. But people can learn more about our individual organization, our services, and our impact on November 5th. And of course, to your point, Josh, most people don't want to have to think about experiencing violence, right? It's not a comfortable conversation to have. But if someone comes to you or you yourself do have to experience that, knowing where to go and where to access support and services is harder if we don't have those conversations. And so tell people that you learned about this organization, that we have, this awesome wraparound support system for individuals who may experience crime, and make sure that people know about us. That's a great way to support the impact of our work. Of course, you can donate, and that's not just to NVRDC. There are so many important causes in our region and across the country. And so thinking about how you prioritize your charitable giving to support the causes that are close to your heart. But also the pro bono aspect. Most folks don't know that you don't have to be a lawyer to donate in-kind services. And even if you have a professional lens, whether that's organizational coaching, or maybe you're really good in developing, philanthropic plans and approaches. Whatever volunteering you can do for an organization, you can count the in-kind dollar amount of that service, and it's a tax-deductible write-off for your business. So I think people recognizing that there's a way to give back, that also, as someone who's trying to run their own company or organization, where you can get a benefit as well, which most people don't know. And last but not least, stay in touch with NVRDC and other local community causes through social media and other platforms that you might use. And we invite you to, of course, follow us on all of these platforms to stay up to date and regarding our work and the impact that we're having.
Awesome.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and chat all that stuff that I promised into the chat box. And then too, I'll invite anyone else, Sylvia or others, joining us. If there's anything that you'd like to share, please feel free to jump on, or any reactions. We're happy to just answer questions or invite other people to share if they feel up for it.
My only reaction is, in support of what you're doing, is I've always been a proponent of supporting the local organizations that actually touch the people directly. I used to be involved with the Avon breast cancer 3-day walk. And, while that was a physical challenge and a challenge and a good, for a good cause, I always was like, but that's to benefit, the big Susan Komen thing. But there's so many organizations locally that need direct services. And so, kind of backed off of doing that and more support directly. So same thing with you. It's great to be able to support somebody who's on the front lines.
Well, thank you.
That's the feeling. Yeah.
That's great. And I just say, I'm so lucky because our staff do such incredible work, and I feel like I have the easy job of talking about it. And I'm just so grateful that I get to lead this incredible organization in partnership with our staff and our board, and really appreciate partners like Mind Team Solutions. You all do great work to also equip, organizations to align their core values to the work and the output they have. And so I want to thank you both for that. And if we don't have other questions, I think we've reached our cutoff, and just want to express my appreciation for you both and the important impact that you have as well in your roles.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Bridgette. Really appreciate you coming on, educating all of us on everything you do, and just keep up the great work. Thanks.
Oh, thank you so much. And I'm sure we'll be in touch.
Absolutely.
Bye, everyone.